Hey guys, it's Courtney, and I am here with another design team project for Not Too Shabby. Today I'm going to be using the Sweet Tea stamp set, and I'm going to be testing out the ARTEZA TriMarkers. I have a review up on my channel as well if you want a more in-depth look at these markers. But first I am going to create my background. So I have a piece of watercolor paper here taped down to a board. I'm just scribbling out one of the pens onto an acrylic block, pretty much soaking the card panel there with just clean water. And then I'm going to just drop in some of the color and kind of just let it spread. Now this is not going to spread the same as regular watercolor or distress inks. You can see that it does spread because these are water-based pens or markers, but you may have to work at it just a little bit more. But in the end, you'll pretty much get the same effects that you do with regular watercolor. I did go ahead and pick up a little bit more of that pigment with my paintbrush, and I just kind of spattered that around to add just a little bit extra color and a little bit extra interest, and then set that aside to dry. Next, I'm going to take a piece of Bristol smooth cardstock here, and I'm using my Misty, but this is optional. Going to stamp out my images with Blackout ink by Ink on 3, and this is a brand new ink pad, so it's really juicy, and I don't want to press too hard to get any smudges, so I had a feeling I was going to probably have to stamp these twice. I did stamp this little glass or cup twice because I want 2 of those on my card. So we are going to move on to the coloring. So I tried a few different techniques with these pens and these images. So first I am going to go ahead and put the pen directly to the paper. So because this would be a round object, I guess, I am going to keep a center highlight. So I'm placing my darkest color on each of the edges, adding a little bit of the mid-tone, and then the lightest color. Next, I am going to take my paintbrush. You can certainly use a water brush. I just prefer a paintbrush just because I feel like I have a little bit more control. And I am dabbing that off on a paper towel. So it's not soaking wet, but I do have, obviously water. It is a wet paintbrush. And I'm kind of working from the edge towards the center to keep that center highlight. So you can see that I get a nice gradient with these colors, at least this combination. It worked well. So once that was done, I'm going to go ahead and use the same color combination for my glasses here. I want these to appear as if they have some sweet tea in them. So first I am taking my lightest color just to draw a line towards the top where it's just a guide for me, so I know kind of where my cutoff point will be. But I'm going to do the same thing with these, adding my darkest color to either side, adding a little bit of that mid-tone, then the lightest color, taking that damp paintbrush. This time I'm moving on to a number 2 round brush just because this is obviously a much smaller area, and blending that out, keeping that center highlight. Now for this second cup, I did the same thing. However, I must have added a little bit more of the darker color, and it looked a lot darker than that first one that I did. And not that I need these to match completely, because watercolor, you're never going to get the same results twice, no matter how hard you try. So I'm not too concerned with them being perfect, but I do want them to match a little bit more. So I scribbled a little bit of that darker color onto that acrylic block and picked up just a teeny tiny bit of it and added a little bit more to either side of this first cup here. And being this is still wet, or at least damp, it will kind of spread on its own. Next, we're going to move on to the coloring of the stars, both on the little dispenser here as well as the ones by themselves. And I tried the same technique as I did for the sweet tea itself, starting with the darkest color, placing down the mid-tone and then the lightest color, and then going in with that damp paintbrush to kind of get those colors to blend. And they did for the most part, with the exception of that darker color. I couldn't get it to blend very nicely. On camera, it looks a lot better than it did in real life. So again, just scribbling on some of that darkest color onto that acrylic block, picking that up with my damp paintbrush and just dabbing that on there in my darkest areas while the paper is still damp, and that way it'll kind of spread out and you'll have a shadow and a highlight. So did the same thing with all of these stars. And for the little I guess it would be the dispenser part of it, I guess. I'm going to use a gray pen here and just add a little bit on either side and then go in with that number 2 round brush. And you can see here that it really didn't spread at all. So I, again, use the acrylic block technique and just added a little bit more and let that spread out. I did notice that some colors blend a lot easier, but I also noticed that the quicker you move, the better. So you're not going to want to put down your color and come back in 10 or 15 minutes and then try to work that with water. It's not going to work. These are water-based, but they're not watercolor pens. So you can't let them sit too long before, getting them to blend with the water. So just finishing up these last 2 stars the same way as I did for the first 2. And then I wanted to kind of pick up some of this color from the ice cubes. The ice cubes will naturally have some of the color of the sweet tea, but I don't want them to be the same exact color. So I'm just placing a little bit of clean water right over the ice cubes that are submerged in that sweet tea, letting that sit for just a second and then dabbing that up with a paper towel. You can definitely still see it, but it's a little bit lighter than the rest. So next we're going to move on to the glass portion. So this time I am not taking the pen to the paper and I'm just starting off scribbling this onto my acrylic block. And what I tried to do here is basically just watercolor with it. So I added my darkest areas and then I tried to spread that out with some clean water. Now for these glasses or cups here, it didn't really work. Didn't know whether it was such a small area and I was too nervous that I was going to touch the brownish portion of it and drag that color out. So I figured it would be a better option to do this larger image here to see how these spread out. So I'm placing down my pigment here in the very darkest areas, which again will be on either side and then kind of under the top portion of this dispenser. Cleaning off my paintbrush, dabbing that on a paper towel, and then trying to spread this out. Now, it spread, but I didn't really have all that much contrast. So I took a little bit more of that pigment and just added that to either side and kind of let that just spread out on its own. Like I said, these are not watercolor pens, so you may have to work at it just a little bit more than maybe you normally would. But overall, I was pretty happy with the results. Not gonna lie, this is not the first time I've used them. I've tried a couple of times and was getting a little frustrated, but now I feel like I pretty much got it. So once all of my coloring was complete, I am going to go ahead and fussy cut everything out, just leaving a small white border on all of my images. You do want to make sure that your panel or your cardstock is completely dry before you go fussy cutting it, just because the amount of water I added, it does kind of change the texture of the paper just a little bit. So once everything was dry, I'm going to go ahead and die cut my main panel here with a wonky stitched rectangle die. And you can see that the background definitely lightened up as it dried, which is completely normal for any water-based anything. So I'm just kind of playing with my placement here before I adhere everything down, making sure I'm happy with the way I planned on putting things before it's permanent. Going to use my wet glue, I prefer to use the Tombow Mono Multi Glue. It dries fairly quickly, but does give you just a couple of seconds to kind of move things around if needed. My paper was a little bit warped from the amount of water that I added to it, so I did have to kind of apply some pressure, especially on all 4 corners, to make sure that stuck down really nicely. Next, I added some foam tape to some of the images, and I'm going to glue this one little cup or one little glass down straight and then kind of build up my other images around it. So I'm going to pop up this dispenser, this sweet tea dispenser here, right directly next to that first glass, and then pop up that second glass on the other side of the one that is down flat, if that makes sense. Popped up these little stars slightly tucked behind the little dispenser. I then realized I never added my sentiment, and now I have images that are popped up. So I wanted to add a few little white gel pen details while I was thinking of how I'm going to add my sentiment without my images getting in the way. I added a little bit of a Nuvo, using my Nuvo Aqua Shimmer pen on the stars and just the ice cubes. then decided to just go for it. So I am inking this up with Simon Says Stamp Black dye ink and making sure that my acrylic block is completely clean because that part will touch your images, and I got pretty good results. So last, I am going to cover all of the stars with my glossy accents, which I am kind of obsessed with lately, and also using these as some embellishments. So instead of pulling out my clear Nouveau drops, I decided I have my glossy accents in my hand, may as well use those, and they pretty much look the same once they're dry. But that is it. That is the card for today. I will leave all of the supplies listed below, and don't forget about your discount code to the Not Too Shabby shop. Thanks, guys. Bye.